The next presenter is Dr. Andrew Chi. He especially came from New York yesterday. He's a former psychiatrist who trained and worked at Tufts, Harvard, and Dartmouth medical schools. Andrew is a life coach and executive coach in New York, and he is the founder of an innovative model and educational platform for societal coaching. And I invite Andrew to start now.
Yes, thank you, Johan. I will be speaking about societal coaching for peace and also different aspects of psychology, both from a societal perspective and also lower down from the perspective of the family and the individual. As Mr. Simone was just sharing as a representative of the World Health Organization, unfortunately there is considerable violence in the world, even in a country where it is supposedly peaceful, like say for instance the United States. When I was working in the emergency room in Boston's combat zone, as it was called, every night, in the middle of the night, we'd get 12 to 16 patients who had psychiatric issues, and quite a number of them would be violent, and we would need security guards to protect the nurses, the medical students, and the physicians. And there are many reasons why people would be aggressive or violent when they came into the emergency room. So unfortunately, violence is a common behavior amongst people all around the world. And that's partially why it becomes expensive. In a country like Liberia, over $7 billion has been spent on peacekeeping, and that's to prevent more people from being killed. Now, why is peacekeeping so difficult to build? As Mr. Simone was saying, peace building really is a very complex process because of the various issues that people have. And so there's a great need for effective methods for establishing and sustaining peace to rebuild a broken society. Societal coaching is an innovative solution for peace. It's a perspective that recognizes that each individual has significant potential for cognitive development and humanitarian impact. It is a comprehensive set of evidence-based and practice-based methods for motivating and supporting suffering people to create personal peace, foster interpersonal peace, and build sustainable socioeconomic conditions for societal peace. And it is also a systematic set of methods that carefully considers all aspects of relevant neurobiology and psychology. That includes both the negative and the positive aspects of human psychology. So instead of merely seeing patients or poverty-stricken people or people in a conflict zone as people who will always need assistance, the focus is to try to figure out how to help these people with the great intellect that they actually are potential of developing, because the human brain, as we now know, is actually incredibly capable of many other functions beyond which we realize. For instance, the storage capacity for each of us when we're born is equal to that of most supercomputers in the world. But we do not actually use our brains to its fullest capacity. So if the focus is on trying to figure out how we can turn these people into talented workers, if we can teach them how to become creatives so that they can help reform their agriculture, so they can develop social innovation, so that they can create businesses, then they'll be able to help to create a sustainable peace by improving the socioeconomic condition of the place where they are. In addition to violence against healthcare workers, I also want to add a much bigger problem really across the world is that with non-compliance, in which patients are not following along with the recommendations of physicians. They're not taking their medications, or they're not following through with the type of care they need to take care of their surgical wounds. In addition to that, they may actually attack medical personnel, as we've heard previously. So how does someone motivate a patient to take their medication? This is actually a question that was posed by the president of the International Red Cross back in May of this year at a meeting at the United Nations. Well, one thing is to take a look at how patients think and to figure out what they really understand about the scientific reality of their condition so that they can choose the best treatment plan, so they can prioritize it, and then therefore become compliant. My colleague, Dr. Robert Chang, has said, In primary care, the focus has been largely upon medical treatment, but not truly upon obtaining the best results. For example, chronic medical conditions such as diabetes, hypertension, and obesity are not only medical conditions, but also have behavioral pathological processes. You can implement all the medical treatment that is available, but the bottom line is that the patient will need to ultimately change their maladaptive cognitions that are linked to and produce unhealthy behaviors in order for that patient to fully control those medical conditions. Physicians and societies didn't really recognize this problem before, but now there is a very strong interest in integrating primary care psychology, and integrated primary care psychology. To illustrate what he's saying, unfortunately, psychologists are left out of the picture when patients are given treatment options. And quite oftentimes, the medical providers are not even asking the patient what they understand of their medical condition and what they understand of the treatment options, the side effects, and the adverse effects. It's also sad to say that honestly, most surgeons, internal medicine doctors, neurologists, and psychiatrists do not communicate with each other as well. Psychologists are involved with clinical psychology, which is the branch of medicine that psychiatrists are involved in. But there's also other branches of psychology that are not considered by medicine, that, for instance, psychiatrists are not trained in. Just to give you guys an example, 20 years ago, when I was a fourth-year medical student, I had a background in infectious disease research. I was working on a malaria vaccine at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, and I worked in two other research infectious labs at the National Institutes of Health and the Food and Drug Administration. And because of my interest in the brain and the mind, I then moved over to psychiatry and neurology and spent 8 years in postdoctoral training in that. But there's still many aspects of psychology that I was not exposed to. So, for instance, in the coaching perspective, there is a great emphasis on helping patients or people outside of healthcare with their intrinsic motivation and with building upon their strengths. The American Psychological Association says on their website that it's difficult, if not impossible, to think of a facet of life where psychology is not involved. The application of psychological research can decrease the economic burden of disease on government and society as people learn how to make choices that improve their health and their well-being. Dr. Chang also stated that if our goal is to produce an intervention or innovation that has a societal impact, then various aspects of psychology should be incorporated. Any kind of decision-making or deviation from a set goal is explained by psychology and neurobiology. Even babies create goals and plans that they enact. Whether babies or adults, we must create and exercise new types of mastery. Any sustainable success requires mastery and change in perspective. And oftentimes, there are many different paths to the same type of success. But why are people unsuccessful? In part, it's because for success, each aspect, as we see in this diagram, needs to be positive and constructive. Unfortunately, failure occurs if any one of these aspects is negative. We also need to take a look at an individual's developments, their understanding of themselves and their identity. The family may have a more solid sense of identity, same with their peers and the institutions, their schools or the government. And if they have positive relationships and these various aspects of their social network are peaceful, then somebody might actually have personal peace. But even then, people may sometimes, unfortunately, have a negative personal perspective and therefore have personal turmoil. And unfortunately, institutions, peers, and family members may also be abusive, neglectful, and reject somebody, which can then lead to confusion, fear and dependence, or anger and rebellion. This can severely limit somebody's capabilities later in life, or could make them far more prone towards violence. There's also a whole psychology of violence that people need to understand to realize the type of anxiety and depression that people suffer from that prevents them from becoming effective workers. Also, in a more peaceful country, there's still high crime areas, there's family dysfunction and bullying. And then there's a whole psychology of neglect and rejection that many children suffer from in foster care, in orphanages, or if they're donor conceived. So aside from the negativities, fortunately, there are ways to start to draw somebody towards the positive. On the one side, we have mental health, which focuses on healing some of the negative or trying to help resolve some negativities. But on the positive side, we have evidence-based coaching. And in particular, positive psychology, which developed at the University of Pennsylvania, I think has been very effective. This is just one of the many books. I highly recommend looking at books by Dr. Martin Seligman. He has more recently, in the past 18 years, after he's finished being the president of the American Psychological Association, has been looking at how character strengths and virtues can really help bring people in the right direction. In addition to that, self-determination theory, developed at the University of Rochester over many decades, has helped us with understanding how to better use motivation and autonomy in a healthy way. So here's some other books you can look at for that. And finally, if we want to really help people to contribute to socioeconomic growth and their own well-being, we have to realize there are also bad habits and addictions that hold people back. There's a massive amount of research that's been done on addiction. And last, my colleague in Munich, Dr. Vera Galen-Baum, has been emphasizing how important equity is. Unfortunately, with equality, people may get the same resources, like the same education, but that does not necessarily mean that they'll really understand and make use of what's given to them. Whereas in equity, we take a look at an individual or, say, a particular community's actual needs, look and see what their strengths and weaknesses are, and build upon that. So if I go back to the original photograph, each of these hands belongs to an individual. Each individual may have their own negative thoughts and emotions. However, they can be trained to defeat their internal negativity and to work together in mutually supportive ways to build peace. And so I'll end this with this discussion with the final slide so people can ask questions based upon it.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew.